Today, we are going to a place of both breathtaking beauty and profound contrast, to Pakistan. But we aren't here to talk about the bustling streets of Karachi or the ancient walls of Lahore. We're here to talk about something far darker, a hidden world that exists behind the walls of respectable homes, a world where dreams go to die. Our story begins not with a crime, but with a terrible stench, a smell so putrid that it could only mean one thing. When police pulled a burlap sack from the murky green waters of the Lahore Canal, they weren't prepared for the horror they would find inside. The body was small, bruised, and disfigured, her limbs twisted into grotesque shapes. It was clear she had been beaten to death, but the final post-mortem report would tell an even more chilling story, a tale of relentless abuse that had been a part of her life for months. But who was this child, and what could she possibly have done to meet such an unforgiving, brutal fate? The truth, when it finally emerged, would expose a level of cruelty so shocking it would make you question everything you thought you knew about humanity. To truly grasp the tragedy, we must rewind the clock and travel back to the rural heartland of Pakistan, to a village where life moved to the rhythm of the seasons, not the clock. This is where we meet Uzma Bibi. She was a simple spirited 16-year-old girl. She was her father's pride, a girl with dreams as vast as the open sky, even if her world was small. Her father, Muhammad Riaz, was a man who worked as a security guard, but no matter how hard he worked, his earnings were a mere pittance, barely enough to feed his family. In Pakistan and in many parts of the world, poverty is not just a lack of money, it's a lack of options, a cage of desperation that forces people to make choices they never should have to. This desperation is what made Muhammad Riaz make one of the most difficult decisions a father can make: to send his own flesh and blood away to a stranger's home to work as a domestic servant. He did it for his family, to put food on the table, to give his other children a chance at a better life. He was approached by a woman named Mahrukh who offered to employ Uzma for 4,000 rupees a month, just over 15 US dollars. But Mahrukh had strange conditions. Uzma's father was not allowed to meet her, and he would have to pick up the money from outside the home every month. These were strange, unsettling demands, but in his desperation, Riaz accepted, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He could not have known that in a few short months, the hunger that had driven him to this decision would be the very thing that cost his daughter her life. For 8 months, Uzma's life in the sprawling city was one of quiet, invisible servitude. We can only imagine the loneliness, the endless chores that stretched from dawn to dusk. Behind the seemingly respectable walls of her employer's home, the insidious reality of her existence began to take hold. She was a child, still a teenager, yet she was treated as less than human. Think about the horrifying contrast. While Mahrukh's own daughter, Aima, same age as Uzma, had everything, Uzma had nothing. While one child slept in a cozy, warm bed, Uzma was forced onto a cold, hard cement floor in the dead of winter. Uzma was a prisoner of her own hunger, often left to survive on just a single meal a day, a calculated form of slow, quiet torture. But here is where the story gets even darker. Neighbors would later whisper to reporters that Uzma was not the first child to suffer at the hands of this family. There were other girls, other victims whose desperate cries were swallowed by the silence of the neighborhood. The question is not just what happened in that house, but why a community would sit by and watch it happen, a testament to the community's own complicity, their suffocating silence that allows such evil to thrive. It was January 19th, 2019. A dish of ground beef had been prepared, a delicacy in a home where Uzma was barely fed. She was expressly forbidden from touching it. But as she served the food, the gnawing hunger inside her won the battle against fear. She made a quick, desperate decision. The homeowner's daughter, Aima, had a plate with a small portion of the meat. In a moment of sheer desperation or desire, Uzma took a single bite from Aima's plate. This small, understandable act unleashed a monstrous fury. "How dare you touch my daughter's plate? You made her food dirty," Mahrukh screamed, her rage completely unhinged. She began beating Uzma senselessly. The blows rained down upon her, shattering her bones and breaking her spirit, but she wasn't done. The sound of her fury was a prelude to the sickening climax that was about to unfold. Mahrukh went to the kitchen and grabbed a heavy pan. The sound of the pan as it connected with the back of Uzma's head was a sickening thud. The blow was so forceful that it caused Uzma to lose consciousness and collapse. Imagine it, a small, starving teenager being beaten relentlessly with an object meant to prepare food by the very person who had taken away her ability to eat. They dragged her limp, unconscious body to the washroom and left her there, a discarded doll on the cold, tiled floor. Hours later, in the eerie silence of that house, Uzma finally stirred, her battered mind trying to make sense of the pain. The video footage is a gut-wrenching, which would later shock the nation. Look at her pain, her face barely recognizable, bruised, swollen, and hauntingly vacant. In a chilling moment of warped compassion, they forced her to eat, as if a meal could somehow fix the pain they had inflicted, but her body, racked with agony, could barely even chew. For a moment, it seemed like the nightmare was over, but little did they know that the worst was yet to come. Due to the internal bleeding caused by the brutal blow to the head, Uzma slipped back into unconsciousness, this time falling into a deep coma. And what happened next is something that no normal human being can comprehend. Instead of rushing her to the hospital, they panicked. In a final twisted attempt to fix what they had done, they tried to use home electric wire to shock her back to life. But it was no use. At some point during the night, her small, suffering body finally gave up. Uzma Bibi was gone. And then, in a final, cold-hearted act of inhumanity, Mahrukh, her daughter Aima, and her sister-in-law Rihana stuffed her lifeless body into a sack and, under the cover of darkness, dumped her into the nearby canal, tossing away her life as if it were nothing more than garbage. They wanted to erase the evidence to make a human being simply disappear. If you've made it this far, you know that stories like these are very difficult to work on. They require deep research and a commitment to telling the stories of those who cannot speak for themselves. If you appreciate our work and want us to keep bringing you stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning after the murder, in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks, Mahrukh went to the police and filed a report. She brazenly lied, telling them that Uzma had run away from their home. She hoped the poverty of Uzma's family and the vastness of the city would be enough to make her a missing person who was never found. But the desperate pleas of Uzma's father, Muhammad Riyaz, and the relentless pressure from social media, which had picked up his story, forced the police to act. When Uzma's body was finally discovered in the canal, her identity was unknown. Initially, police suspected she was a victim of a robbery gone wrong. But the post-mortem report told a different, more horrifying story. The report revealed old bruises and cuts all over her body, clear signs of long-term abuse. Her stomach was completely empty, a detail that painted a devastating picture of her suffering. It was then that the police, guided by a new suspicion, went back to the house of Mahrukh and her accomplices. The truth began to unravel. During a search of Mahrukh's home, police found a shocking video on her cell phone. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence. The woman, her daughter Aima, and her sister in law Rihanna were all arrested. They were the ones who had driven Uzma's dead body in the dark of night and thrown her into the canal like a piece of garbage. The trial that followed was a public spectacle, fueled by the national outrage that Uzma's death had ignited. For once, the power and wealth of the accused were not enough to bury the truth. The pressure from activists and the public was immense. In a landmark verdict, all three women were convicted. Mahrukh was sentenced to death, and the other two were convicted for their roles in the crime. It was a rare moment of justice, a glimmer of hope that the voices of the poor can sometimes pierce the deafening silence of a corrupt system. The case of Uzma Bibi is more than just a murder story. It's a tragic, brutal reflection of a deep-seated sickness in our world, the modern slavery that exists under the guise of domestic servitude. Think about it. A young girl from a village who knows nothing but poverty is sent to a home filled with unimaginable luxury. She sees people with their designer bags, their expensive cars, their lavish meals, all while she's surviving on scraps. This is a form of psychological torture, a constant, cruel reminder of the class divide. It is a tragedy born from desperation and poverty, a desperation so great that it forces a parent to send their own flesh and blood away. And for those of us who live in a different reality, it should be a constant reminder to be gentle and kind, to see the humanity in the person serving you, to question the systems that allow such brutal exploitation to flourish. The story of Uzma Bibi is a haunting one. It is a story of a child whose life was cut short for the price of a single bite of meat, but in her death, she became a voice for the countless others who still suffer in silence. Her case will forever be a symbol of injustice and a plea for a world where no one is ever seen as less than human.